So some of this, I'm sure, will sound like a repeat, and I always like to repeat good news. But in local government, those who have found success really understand one basic principle, and that is we've had to reset the financial reality of how to run a city. If you think about the impact that we have had really since the beginning of 2008, we've seen a substantial drop in revenue that, in all reality, will not recover in the way that it recovered before. A lot of the revenue that we had prior to that time was driven by an explosive housing market. We have every reason to believe, and some of you are much closer to this than we are, but there's still a lot of foreclosures and short sales, a lot of inventory to go through. I think we're 3 to 4 years at best to any kind of recovery relative to the housing market. And hopefully, and I say this sincerely, hopefully it won't be the explosive kind of growth that really got out of control that happened prior to that. But what that means really for local government is we have to think differently about how we manage the city's resources. And look around you. You hear the stories on the news, you read them in the newspaper every day. There are cities to the north of us and cities to the south of us that are laying police and firefighters off. There are cities that have used real estate excise tax as a funding mechanism for capital projects. And guess what? The housing market drives a real estate excise tax. And so when there's no money there, the banks still want their money, so you have to cut service to provide the revenue that's required to pay your debt. We're fortunate. We have very little debt at the city of Everett. And our employees have really made some incredible sacrifices these last few years without complaint. For our exempt employees and elected leaders, we are now in the third year without a cost of living increase. Over the last 5 years, 6 years, we have looked at all of our costs, particularly around labor costs and benefits, and we've renegotiated, and I want to give a shout out to our union leaders who have understood the environment we're in and have been very receptive to the fact that we cannot continue to spend at the rate that we're spending. But we have done really the hard work, and it is hard work, with great partnership and great support from our city employees to make sure that we can deliver services in a very effective and a very cost-effective way. The other thing that we had the foresight to do, and in fact, Arlen Hatlow was one of the first council members that really drove this idea. We have a fund balance policy at the city of Everett, and let me just describe that quickly. We require 20% revenue in reserve. That amount is about a little over $22 million. It is there for an emergency. We have not had to use it through this downturn. If we had to use it for some kind of disaster, we also have to accompany a payback plan. And I can tell you that that has really helped us in so many ways at the city. We just had the opportunity to reaffirm our Standard & Poor rating of AA+ for our bonds in November. In the depth of this recession, we saw an increase in our bond rating, a 3-level increase, and reaffirmed again in November. And I can tell you, look to the federal government, to look to governments around you and businesses around you, that doesn't happen by accident. It happens by strong financial performance. Controlling expense obviously is one part of the equation, but the other part of the equation, and has really been more and more important over the last 3 to 4 years, is what is it we're doing collectively around job growth and growing the economy. And I would submit to you that the public sector cannot solve this problem alone. We hear a lot of rhetoric from the federal and the state level about, why are we in this recession and what are our leaders doing about it? There's an awful lot we can do in partnership, but we can't solve the problem completely. I went to the council and asked that they pass a B&O head tax, a $1,000 head tax for any company that added at least 50 employees in a calendar year, up to 500. And for adding employees into our community, they would get a $1,000 per employee tax benefit. That has been an important recruiting tool for us, and a tool that I suspect that we're going to use for the years to come. I believe as well we've been a strong partner with our aerospace community, and I think oftentimes we take aerospace for granted, and I think if you look at recent decisions like the tanker decision, the 737 MAX, the decision to close operations in Wichita, Kansas, the Boeing company, and this is not unlike many companies in this country, are going to go to the communities where they can find the highest educated employees at the lowest possible price. There's and any of us who have angst about, well, where's the loyalty? The loyalty is in having a strong business environment. The loyalty is in having and providing higher education opportunities. And the city of Everett has really, I think, been a strong partner in ensuring that future of aerospace is and remains strong for years in the future. We were very much part of the effort to ensure that the American-built tanker, the 767, was built in the United States. I led an effort of mayors across the country to write letters of support and be supportive of that effort. Obviously very disappointed for Mayor Brewer in Wichita, who was one of the first to come forward, and lo and behold, now doesn't have a Boeing presence in his community. And that was awfully hard, given the loyalty that he showed all of us going into that process. We are very happy to see the first deliveries of the 787, obviously, the next generation of 747. The 777 remains a strong part of Boeing's portfolio. And even with the proposals, as we see planes being sold and more success in aerospace, we're only going to realize a very modest increase in revenue. Our revenue is projected to increase about 1.6% in 2012. And you might ask yourself, well, why is that the case? I mean, aerospace is booming, they're hiring, which is great news for the community. Why isn't the city seeing more revenue? And I know many of you in this room were part of our effort to ensure that at the time the 787 was built in the Pacific Northwest and specifically in Everett. With that, the city of Everett made a commitment that after thresholds were met in aerospace manufacturing, the B&O tax would drop by 75%. So think about just for a moment. The city of Everett's B&O tax rate is 50% of what's allowed by state law. And then take another 75% off of that in your biggest employment sector in your community. And people say, well, why would you do that? I mean, are you just not cutting your throat? But the reality is, I would rather have 25% of something than 100% of nothing. And so we made a very conscious decision that that was the kind of thing that we had to do to ensure that aerospace was successful in this community for years to come. The other thing that the Boeing company, and I mentioned the Boeing company because obviously they are the 800-pound gorilla in this region. They have said to us in the clearest of terms that they need more engineering degrees developed here in the state of Washington. And you all know, and you partnered with me to bring higher education to this community. And some people say, well, you know, you just give it up. I mean, we worked, 7 years to get the University of Washington here, with some success early on, with diminished success later on. But what we found, and what I found, was a very strong partner in Elson Floyd and a very strong partner in Washington State University, a research institution that wants to be in this community, not just now, but wants to grow that future in a very significant way. The governor has, in her higher education package this year, set aside a $7.6 million budget ask that will bring 60 more engineering degree slots to University Center this fall at the direction of Washington State University. That is huge. I think it sends the kind of signal that the Boeing company and the aerospace community needs, and I hope it hastens the day that we have a full branch campus of Washington State University in our community. And while you may not hear a lot about that in the newspaper or on TV, I can assure you that discussions about advancing that cause sooner rather than later are happening on a very frequent basis. And so I would just ask you to stay tuned and continually be supportive of our efforts in that regard. The second largest employer we have in the city, and I'm sure this isn't a surprise to many of you, is the Naval Station Everett. It was a year ago in December of 2010 that we had the announcement, fortunately, that the Nimitz would replace the Lincoln. That was very much in doubt, and I think for those of you who aren't close to this, I believe had we not been a strong lobbyist in that regard, lobbying for our community, that aircraft carrier well may have sailed into the sunset without a replacement, or a replacement simply of smaller ships. And if you think about it, that base brings about $318 million into our community on an annual basis. And imagine half of that gone with, on Pearl Harbor Day, the Abraham Lincoln sailing out of the community without a replacement. And so I'm awfully proud of the work that we did, and I want to give a shout out to Pat McLean. Is Pat here? There you are. Pat, as Bob Drewell would say, Pat was around when the earth was cooling. but he's been very much a part of Naval Station Everett from inception, and his knowledge and experience has really been invaluable, and I can't thank you enough, Pat, for all you've done around the military. So a little bit, let me hit on a couple more industries, and then let's talk a little bit specifically about quality of life and what we're doing inside the city. The partnership that we have with the Port of Everett is very important to us, and I only see that relationship improving. Their shipping business was up 18% last year, and they're expecting that shipping business to grow. I'm very, very happy that Providence decided to invest $500 million in over 2,000 high-paying jobs in our community. And I'm also very proud that we have one of the nationally recognized medical facilities in the country for high-quality health care at a low cost, and that's the Everett Clinic. So, Rick, thank you for your institution and all the great work that you do as well. Probably the biggest disappointment, and I guess that's just part of life, But probably the biggest disappointment this last year was the closure of the Kimberly-Clark Mill. It was about this time last year that KC came to us, said that they were going to close the mill. They had the full resources and support of the city of Everett through this last year. And I want to specifically mention Laney McMullen, who worked very closely with prospective buyers, worked with those who could finance the sale. And we got awfully close with Atlas Holdings acquiring that mill. But what happened was, and I don't want to be crass about this, but I would say that you never ask ecology a question that you don't know the answer to. And that's what happened in this process. And what happened then was the cost of the cleanup in the waterway jumped significantly. And what it eventually affected was the buyer's ability to get a bridge loan, which was necessary to make the sale come together. And so it literally fell apart before our eyes. I can tell you that I had probably 5 days without sleep over a weekend and a couple days before, trying to resurrect or save that sale. We brought every imaginable idea to the table. We looked and worked with the port to try to find interim financing. We just were not successful in getting it done. And I'll tell you, it's been hard for me to admit that we didn't have success there. Intellectually, I know we did everything that we could have. Emotionally, I'm not sure. I second guess myself an awful lot about could we have done more, could we have gone a different way. But all of that said, what's important now is what happens to the future of that site. We will meet with Kimberly-Clark later this week. We'll have an opportunity to sit down with them and begin to develop a vision for the redevelopment of that site. The good news, at least on a preliminary basis, is we have a very willing partner in KC that wants to understand and wants to be responsive to what the vision of the city is for that property. Now, it's a very complicated process, but let me just basically tell you that we have about 60 to 65 acres of industrially zoned land. Industrially zoned land is protected in the city of Everett by ordinance. The council passed an ordinance that said that zone is important for job creation, and so we very much hold to that principle. But I'm not talking about a redevelopment of smokestacks and stuff, emitting into the air. I'm talking about light industrial, high-end commercial development, high-paying jobs. But the first thing we have to do, and this is what's really going to be important over the next several months and few years, is we've got to get that site cleaned up, and we've got to get those buildings that don't have productive use in the future removed. And you may think to yourself, well, that sounds pretty easy, but when you deal with ecology and you're dealing with demolition and you're dealing with soil that potentially is contaminated, and I'm talking not in the waterway, but upland, it can become a very complicated process. Just look west to Port Angeles, who 15 years after their mill closed are still trying to figure out what they're going to do in terms of reuse of that property. And that would be the biggest tragedy, frankly, of all, is if that property just sat fallow and nothing happened. So it is a process that we're at the beginning of in terms of developing it. It's going to be a process that will, as we begin to develop a framework for a vision of that property, that we will be out to the business community and out to the citizens of our community for comment and input. It'll be a very transparent process, but we need to get on with the business of redeveloping that property. So let me just quickly, I think I'm going too long here. I get awfully excited about all that's going on in the city, but let me just hit on a few capital investments that really I think are important in the public sector to support private sector growth. We really try to focus on the basics. One of the biggest industrial centers we have inside the city of Everett is Merrill Creek. It's a light industrial center. There's 15 million square feet of space out there with an industrial vacancy rate of about 5%, with about 65 plus acres remaining to be developed. It is important that we continue to develop that site and make sure that it's successful. And how is it successful? One of the ways that a lot of citizens don't see, but you all support with water and sewer rates, are the $100 million investment that we'll need to make over the next 10 years to our water and sewer system. And it's foundational. I get it. It's not real sexy, but if we don't do it and don't do it right, business doesn't grow, we don't meet environmental requirements, and the city doesn't move forward. So we pay an awful lot of attention to that, and we'll need to do that going forward. We will finish 112th. If you know or use that street, the last piece of that from the bridge at I-5 to 527, we're still securing right-of-ways, but that is due for sidewalks and final approval there. And I would tell you that we've taken a very modest approach to our ask of the legislature relative to transportation projects. We've really tried to stay focused on transportation projects to job centers. And let me just hit on a few of them. I see Reed Shockey here, and Reed, I want to thank you for all your great work with SCIT, and it's a group that we work with closely, but what we're proposing is to use the shoulder of I-5 from the Snohomish Bridge to Marysville, and I know Mayor Nearing is excited about that, but to use that as a outlet lane during high traffic, and this would be a northbound lane at a fairly modest cost. We have an on-ramp at Everett Mall Way, southbound on-ramp by the Sherwin-Williams paint store, which is a modest project, but would take about 25% of the traffic out of the 527, 526 interchange. We're beginning to design a new half interchange at Hardison Road and 526 to help provide relief for aerospace. And we continue to be a partner with Snohomish County in replacing the US 2 trestle westbound, a viaduct, by the way, that is as old as the viaduct in Seattle. And we don't want to see it come down before we replace it. We want to replace it in a very systematic way. We had the good fortune of being able, with a water and sewer project, to make improvements to Hoyt Avenue. That was really phase one of 2 streets that we want to improve. Design is almost complete on Rucker Avenue, and once funding is secure, we'll move ahead to make that improvement. Our public improvements, we try very much to match what's going on in the private sector to make sure that we're supportive with private dollars and investment for private sector jobs and growth. I'm very happy, and I don't know if any of the Scott Dell family is here, but very happy to see phase 2 of Library Place near completion. They've done an awful lot and made huge commitments to this community, and they need to be thanked and appreciated for all they've done. Art Space also is a project that is a private sector project that provides housing downtown. And again, someone who had a significant amount to do with this is Deborah Bryant. After more than a decade of studies and planning, we are under construction with a new municipal court. An $8 million project downtown that is really critical to court operations. They currently operate on about 8,000 square feet. This new facility will double that for them and make them more productive and be able to deal with public safety issues in a more significant way. And about this time next year, just finally, the Broadway Bridge replacement will begin. We were fortunate in getting federal funding, last of the earmarks, if you will, to do that bridge. If we were trying to get funding today, I'm sure it would be quite a different story. But the plan is that we won't interrupt traffic completely during construction. We'll narrow it to 2 lanes of traffic, finish half of it and do the other half as well. Let me just talk a few minutes about safety and our neighborhoods. I mentioned that public safety is really critical to what I do as your mayor. I think I have 2 primary basic responsibilities. One is the financial health of the city, to make sure that that's maintained. The other is to make sure that our citizens are safe and that we provide vital public safety services, and we do, and I'm very proud of the work that we do. Kathy Atwood is here as our new police chief. The last several months she's been involved in a strategic plan that you'll see rolled out in the next several weeks and months, really focusing on how do we improve public safety in our community. We do have some good news, 2011 over 2010, that I want to share with you. Personal crimes, these are crimes against persons in our community, is down 9.5%. Vehicle prowls down 20%, and vehicle thefts down 18%. The area of challenge for us right now are burglaries, home and commercial. And we're focusing an awful lot of attention, and as the strategic plan rolls out, you're going to hear more and more about that. I guess one cautionary note about statistics, though, I mean, they can tell you anything you want to say about any situation, but we report every crime. We respond to every 911 call. And so oftentimes when you get into this comparison game, it's awfully hard to make an apples to apple comparison. Some communities don't respond to certain crimes. So guess what? Their statistics look very low. Looks like a safe place to be and a safe place to live, which may be totally contrary to what's going on the ground. But the point here is we're measuring ourselves year over year. We have a crime analyst that's looking at crime statistics in real time. And when I became mayor, that was not the case. And so we're able to respond in real time in terms of crime waves or areas that are of concern. So Kathy, I look forward to great things. I'm very pleased you're our new police chief. You're doing great work. And I'm awfully proud too of our firefighters and our paramedic. Many of you in this room supported our paramedic increase here a few years ago, and I can't thank you enough for all that you've done in that regard. So I better get on with this. No one running to the exit yet. The other point that I wanted to make, because public safety, as I mentioned, is so critically important, Laura Van Slyke has assumed the role of leading our prosecuting attorney's office at the city. Someone who is highly skilled, and I'm very, very pleased that she's done that. There's a great team down there. The focus and leadership that she's providing is going to be terrific. So if you see her or know her, thank her for all that she's done. And also, in addition to sort of all the basics that that occur in the city, we do like to have fun. We have a lot of summer activities, from Sorticulture and Jetty Island Days, music in the parks, and cinema under the stars, our animal farm, and other activities. And I know at times I get this question, well, you know, if you could do more in public safety, or you could do more in this area if you simply removed or cut out of your budget these community activities. But I'm reminded of a story, and I'll paraphrase this, but it was early in World War II. Churchill was asked to close the churches and the senior centers, activity centers, the symphony, as a measure of safety, but also a measure of cost control during World War II. And he made a real famous statement at that time, which is, if we do that, what are we fighting for? And so the important point, I think, here is it is a tremendous balancing act to run a city. And the balance that we're trying to find is to make sure that we have a great quality of life, to make sure that we're responsible with our finances, that we're doing our level best to keep our citizens safe. That's the balance that we're looking for. And in that regard, let me just say that we value, and this is really, I think, important to the kind of city we are and the quality of the city we are, we very much value the civic engagement that we have. Over 200 citizens volunteer their time on boards and commissions. Another over 200 volunteer at the animal shelter, and a variety of volunteer activities. Literally hundreds of people making the quality of life in our city better than it would be otherwise. And frankly, we couldn't do it without them. And we do have, from time to time, controversial issues and differences of opinion. And for someone who grew up as a parent pleaser and wanted to make sure, try to make as many people happy as I can, you can imagine to my dismay that, God, lo and behold, not everyone agreed with me. Even when I was presenting the most logical of arguments, I thought, this makes perfect sense. Why don't they get it? But the point here is there are a lot of differences of opinion in a community, and you'll find that in your business as well. That's I think, the strength of our city. But at the end of the day, I think there's two sort of basic principles that are important. One is that we can engage in that kind of difference of opinion in a civil manner and not lose our perspective. And I always endeavor to do that. The other thing I would tell you, and this is sort of the aha moment for me in this job, is that I have to look at a lot of different factors in making decisions. It's not as easy as, well, if this is what the neighborhood wants, by golly, we're going to do that. There are financial concerns, there are public safety concerns. You really need to look at the organization in total and do the best that you possibly can. And that's what I try to do every day. I think that's what our staff does every day. I live by that principle, try to do the right thing. I also live by another principle, which is never do anything that you wouldn't want to see on the front page of the Herald. So a lot of great work in that regard. And let me just say, I've touched on some of the things that we need to stay focused on in the coming year, and a couple I haven't. But growing jobs and improving the economy right now is every bit as important as making sure that our financial health is strong. And we have the Riverfront project, the port has its project. We now will have another opportunity on the KC site. We need, in my view, to put high octane on all three of those and to see those to fruition. And it's going to take a collective community effort to make sure that we have the outcome that we have. We need to continually grow the importance of higher education. We need to be mindful that our largest employer will go somewhere else if they're not finding what they need here. And so we need to make sure that our education system from K-12 to higher education meets the demands of companies like the Boeing and other aerospace companies, and we'll continually stay focused on that. And we'll continue to make the basic investments in our community that will be important to our safety and to growing the economy and growing jobs. I do hope there is a better day coming in terms of our ability to begin to set revenue aside, to begin to make more robust investments in our park system. And our park system does, in my view, a remarkable job maintaining what they have. We'll replace one of the synthetic fields at Cache Park this year with $1 million that Paul Kaftansky has cobbled together. I'm lobbying the council now. That'll be coming before you for approval. My signing approval is only $999,900. No. But it is an important project as well. But if we all work together for the betterment of this community, and you do an awful lot, all of you, in the support of Everett and Snohomish County, we will come out of this stronger and better. And I think as we think about our spending habits, whether it's at home or in our businesses or in a public corporation like the city of Everett, there is a new standard that we need to think about. The excesses of the past, in my view, is not what we want in our future. Americans, all of us, are sometimes criticized that we have a pretty short memory about bad things that have happened to us. And in my opinion, what we've gone through is probably the biggest downturn and the most extended downturn that we've seen in our lifetime. I think it's awfully important that we don't forget that experience and that it changes us for the better.